Blood stains the snow crimson as masked assassins circle the pale-haired woman. 3 months pregnant with the future of the North, they said she'd be easy prey. They were catastrophically wrong. Silver light erupts from her skin as an ancient wolf of legend tears through the attackers with savage grace. The Alpha King arrives to find his mate standing over 6 bodies, protecting their unborn child with power the realm thought extinct. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more forbidden romance. 3 months earlier, the iron-banded door to the Alpha King's private solar stood slightly ajar, and Lyanna Snow knew with absolute certainty that she shouldn't be here. She had been summoned to Winterfell only hours before, pulled from her quiet existence in the outer villages with a message that made no sense. The Alpha King of the North requires your presence, immediately. No explanation, no context. Just a royal command, wrapped in parchment, sealed with grey wax, and the direwolf sigil that ruled the northern kingdoms. At 23, Lyanna had never been anywhere near the seat of power. She was nobody, a white-haired Omega from a family with no pack claim, untouched and unremarkable, except for the unusual coloring that had marked her as different from birth. Her hair fell in waves of white gold that caught moonlight like captured snow, and her eyes were an unsettling shade of silver violet that had caused whispers throughout her childhood. Some called her blessed by the old gods. Others whispered she was cursed, a harbinger of change no one wanted. Mostly, people just avoided her. She had long accepted her fate as a solitary Omega, destined to live on the fringes of pack territory, tending herb gardens and keeping to the shadows. The summons had shattered that careful existence like a stone through ice, and now she stood in the royal fortress, hopelessly lost in corridors of ancient stone and flickering torchlight, trying to find the receiving hall where she was supposed to wait for the king's acknowledgement. But Winterfell was a labyrinth built over centuries, and every passageway looked identical in the darkness. And somehow, she had ended up here, in front of a door that clearly led to private chambers. The direwolf carved into the dark wood left no doubt whose rooms these were. She should turn around, should find a guard or servant to redirect her properly. Should not be standing outside the Alpha King's personal quarters like some foolish girl from a cautionary tale. But through the gap in the door, she heard a sound that froze her in place. A low groan, unmistakably masculine and rough, edged with something between frustration and desperate need. The sound sent unexpected heat coiling through her body, pooling low in her belly in a way she'd never experienced. Her hand moved to the door without conscious permission, fingers pressing against cold iron as she pushed it open just inches wider. What she saw stole the breath from her lungs entirely. The chamber beyond was dominated by a massive hearth, where flames cast dancing shadows across stone walls. But it wasn't the fire that captured her attention. It wasn't the furs draped across a bed, large enough for a giant. It wasn't even the weapons mounted on the walls or the crown resting on a side table like an afterthought. It was the man sprawled in a heavy wooden chair near the fire, head thrown back, his powerful body taut as a drawn bow. He was magnificent in ways her inexperienced mind struggled to comprehend. Broad shoulders that spoke of battlefield strength, a chest sculpted with the kind of muscle that came from wielding a sword since childhood, skin that glowed bronze in the firelight, marked with scars that told stories of survival. His hair was dark auburn, the color of autumn leaves before they fall, disheveled and falling across a face that was both beautiful and brutal. Strong jaw shadowed with stubble, aristocratic nose, lips parted as another groan escaped him. But it was what he was doing that made Liana's core clench with a heat she had no name for. His hand was wrapped around his rigid length, stroking with a rhythm that was simultaneously controlled and desperate, like a man at war with himself. His other hand gripped the arm of the chair so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His eyes were closed, brow furrowed in concentration or perhaps torment, and she could see the muscles of his jaw working as if he were fighting to stay silent. She should leave, should run, should pretend she never saw this. But her body refused to obey. The air in the room shifted suddenly, like the moment before lightning strikes. His eyes snapped open, the most piercing grey she'd ever seen, storm-coloured and wild, and locked directly onto her frozen form in the doorway. Time stopped. The world tilted. And Liana felt something inside her chest tear open and reach toward him like a flower turning toward the sun. It was violent, undeniable, terrifying. A pull so strong it drove her to her knees on the cold stone floor. One hand pressed against her heart, as if that could stop the sensation of being unmade and remade in a single breath. Across the room, Robb Stark, Alpha King of the North and Warden of Winterfell, stared at the pale-haired Omega girl kneeling in his doorway, and felt his entire world shatter and reform around a single, impossible truth. The bond had found them, and there was no escaping fate. For 7 agonizing heartbeats, neither of them moved. Robb Stark stared at the girl kneeling in his doorway, this impossible creature with moonlight hair and eyes like winter storms, and felt the bond wrap around his ribs like iron chains. Every instinct screamed at him to go to her, to pull her close, to claim what the gods had apparently decided belonged to him. Instead, he forced himself to stillness, to control, to the discipline that had kept him alive through wars and political machinations and the endless grinding weight of the crown. "Get up," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He'd managed to adjust his clothing, though his body still thrummed with unfulfilled need and something far more dangerous. The bone-deep recognition of a mate bond snapping into place. Liana's silver-violet eyes were wide with shock, her pale face flushed. One hand still pressed against her chest as if she could physically hold back what was happening between them. Slowly, shakily, she rose to her feet. She started, but the words died in her throat. "You shouldn't be here." Robb stood, putting distance between them, even as everything in him howled in protest. "How did you get past the guards?" "I was summoned," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "To Winterfell. But I got lost in the corridors, and the door was open, and I heard—" She stopped abruptly, color flooding her cheeks. She heard me. The realization sent heat crawling up his own neck. Of all the ways to meet his mate, if the bond had truly chosen her, this was perhaps the most humiliating. Before either could speak again, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. Captain Gregor appeared in the doorway, hand on his sword hilt, 2 guards flanking him. His weathered face went carefully blank as he took in the scene. His king, barely composed, and an unknown Omega in the private solar. "Your Grace," Gregor said carefully, "is there a problem?" "The girl was lost," Robb said, his tone brooking no argument. "She's been summoned to Winterfell but was never properly escorted." His eyes cut to Liana. "What's your name?" "Lyanna Snow, Your Grace." Snow. Bastard-born or unclaimed. No family protection, no pack allegiance. Exactly the kind of Omega the Alpha Council would devour alive if they knew what had just happened in this room. "Take her to the guest quarters in the East Wing," Robb commanded. See that she's fed, given proper clothing, and assigned a personal guard. Gregor's eyebrows rose fractionally. A guard, Your Grace? For protection or... Protection, Rob cut him off, his voice dropping into the alpha tone that made even his most seasoned warriors flinch. No one questions her. No one interrogates her. No one touches her. Is that clear? Perfectly, Your Grace. As the guards moved to escort Liana away, she cast one last glance over her shoulder at him. The bond pulled taut between them like a rope, and Rob had to lock his knees to keep from following. The moment she disappeared from sight, he sagged against the chair, running both hands through his hair. Gods damn it all to hell. In the northern kingdoms, power had always been governed by 3 immutable laws, older than written history, enforced by blood and steel and the will of the old gods. Alphas ruled. Their dominance was absolute, their word law, their strength the foundation upon which kingdoms were built. Betas served. They were the enforcers, the advisors, the backbone of every army and council and institution that kept civilization from descending into chaos. Omegas obeyed. That was the way it had always been. The Moon Law, decreed centuries ago by the Alpha Council and sanctified by every god in every kingdom, stated that Omegas had no right to choose their mates. When the bond manifested, it was recognized as divine will. The Alpha Council would verify the bond, ensure it was genuine, and then the Omega would be bound to their Alpha, whether they wished it or not. To refuse the bond meant exile. To fight it meant death. Virgin Omegas were especially dangerous because they were rare, prized, and rumored to carry dormant bloodlines that could awaken powers thought long extinct. The Council feared them, coveted them, controlled them with ruthless efficiency. And Robb Stark, Alpha King of Winterfell, had spent the last 5 years refusing every attempt by the Council to force a political mating on him. You must take a mate, they'd said. The bloodline must continue. The North requires an heir. He'd resisted because he knew what the bond did. He'd seen it twist alphas into possessive tyrants and reduce omegas to nothing more than breeding stock and political pawns. He'd watched his own father's bond with his mother. Beautiful and true, yes, but also consuming, overwhelming. A force that left little room for choice or autonomy. Robb had sworn he would never inflict that on another person. And now, the moon had laughed at his careful control and thrown Lyanna Snow into his path. By the time Robb made it to the council chamber an hour later, word had already spread. Lord Harridan, head of the Alpha Council's northern branch, stood waiting with 4 other councillors, their expressions ranging from curious to calculating. Your Grace, Harridan began, his silver beard bristling. We've heard you've taken an Omega into your personal protection. A virgin Omega, no less. Is this true? Robb took his seat at the head of the table, his face carved from stone. I've offered sanctuary to a summoned guest who was inadequately escorted. Nothing more. Nothing more. Councillor Thrace leaned forward, eyes gleaming. The guards report she was found in your private solar, Your Grace. Surely you understand how that appears. I understand that the guards need better training if they're gossiping like washerwomen, Robb said coldly. If a bond has manifested, Harridan started. If a bond has manifested, Robb interrupted, then it will be verified properly and appropriately. Until then, the girl is under my protection. She will not be questioned, examined, or approached by this council without my explicit permission. The councillors exchanged glances. Your Grace, Harridan said carefully, the Moon Law is clear. If the bond is real, she must be She must be nothing until I say otherwise. Rob's voice dropped into Alpha command, flooding the room with dominance that made even the other Alphas shift uncomfortably. Are we clear? Silence. I said, Are we clear? Yes, Your Grace, they murmured in unison. As Rob left the chamber, his hands were shaking. He'd just declared war on the council without saying the words aloud. And it was all for a girl whose name he'd learned less than 2 hours ago. The bond was already changing him. He could only hope it wouldn't destroy them both. Lyanna couldn't sleep. The guest quarters in Winterfell's East Wing were more luxurious than anywhere she'd ever stayed. Soft furs piled on a bed large enough for 3 people, a fire crackling in a stone hearth, windows that overlooked the snow-covered courtyard where guards patrolled in the moonlight. She should have felt safe, protected. Instead, she felt like her skin was too tight, like something beneath her ribs was trying to claw its way out and run back to him. The bond. It had to be the bond everyone whispered about in frightened tones. The sacred connection that stripped away choice and free will, that turned Omegas into possessions and Alphas into tyrants. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palm. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. When she opened the door, Robb Stark stood in the corridor, still dressed in the formal black leather and wolf fur cloak he'd worn to the council meeting. His crown sat slightly crooked on his head, as if he'd forgotten it was there. The guard who'd been posted outside her door, a kind-faced woman named Mara, had discreetly disappeared around the corner. "Your Grace," Lyanna whispered, dropping into an awkward curtsy. "Don't," he said roughly. "Please, just don't." She straightened slowly, searching his face. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. The tension in his jaw, the weight he carried like armor he could never remove. "I shouldn't be here," Robb admitted. "It's not protocol, but I needed to make sure you were settled, that you felt safe." "I do," she said, though her voice wavered. "Thank you for the protection. I know I don't deserve—" "You deserve everything." The words came out fierce, almost angry. He caught himself, took a breath. "I'm sorry. The bond is louder than I expected." Lyanna stepped back, opening the door wider. "Would you like to come in? Just for a moment?" It was wildly inappropriate, dangerous, exactly the kind of thing that would give the council ammunition. Robb crossed the threshold anyway. They ended up near the fire, not sitting on the furniture like civilized people, but on the thick furs spread across the stone floor. It felt less formal somehow, less like an Alpha King and an unclaimed Omega, more like 2 people trying to make sense of an impossible situation. Robb reached up and removed his crown, without seeming to realize he was doing it, setting it aside on a low table as if it were nothing more than a heavy hat. His hair was mussed where the metal had pressed against it, making him look younger, more human. "Does it hurt?" Lyanna asked softly. "The crown, I mean. It looks heavy." "Everything about ruling is heavy," he said, then seemed surprised he'd admitted it. "Sorry, I don't usually. I'm not supposed to show weakness." "I don't think honesty is weakness." His gray eyes found hers across the firelight. The council would disagree. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire popping and crackling between them. Lyanna was acutely aware of how close they were, close enough that she could smell cedar and snow, and something uniquely him that made her Omega instincts purr with recognition. Not close enough to touch, but the space between them felt charged, electric, like the air before a storm. "Can I ask you something?" Liana said finally. "Anything. Why did you summon me?" "I don't understand what I'm doing here." Rob frowned. "I didn't summon you. The message you received, it must have come from the council. They must have sensed something. Known somehow that you were—" He trailed off. "That I was what?" "Meant for you." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "I spent my whole life being told I was too strange, too different. Hair too pale, eyes too odd, scent too weak. Other Omegas in the villages had suitors, had families who wanted to arrange matches. I had nothing. I thought I was broken." "You're not broken." Rob's voice was rough with conviction. "You're extraordinary. I could feel it the moment you walked through that door. The bond made you feel that way, not me, the real me." "I don't believe that." Liana hugged her knees to her chest. "It doesn't matter what we believe. The moon law says the bond is absolute. That once it manifests, I have no choice. I become—" "What? Your property? Your obligation?" She met his eyes. "I've spent 23 years belonging to no one, Your Grace. I don't know how to belong to someone now, even if the gods demand it." The raw vulnerability in her words seemed to crack something open in Rob. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together as if in prayer. "I'm terrified," he confessed quietly. "I've spent 5 years refusing to take a mate because I've seen what the bond does. I've seen alphas become possessive monsters, treating their mates like objects instead of people. I've seen Omegas lose themselves completely, their entire identity swallowed by the bond, until nothing of them remains." His jaw clenched. "My greatest fear is becoming a tyrant. And the bond, it could make me exactly that." "Then we're both afraid of the same thing," Liana whispered. "Losing ourselves." "Yes." The fire crackled. Outside, snow began to fall in soft, silent flakes. "What if we made a choice?" Liana said suddenly. "Before the council forces one on us, what if we decided, together, what this bond means, what it doesn't mean?" Rob looked at her with something like hope, kindling in his storm-gray eyes. "You'd want that, even knowing what I am, what I could become?" "I think," Liana said carefully, "that you're the first person in my life who's ever asked me what I want, instead of telling me what I should be. That means something." He smiled then, small, tentative but real. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met, Liana Snow." "Is that good or bad?" "It's terrifying and perfect." They sat there in the firelight, not touching but closer than before, the bond humming between them like a living thing. For the first time since the summons had arrived, Liana felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. The door burst open with a crash. Lord Harridan stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 council guards, his face flushed with righteous fury. "Seize the Omega," he commanded. "By order of the Alpha Council. She is to be brought before us immediately for bond verification and judgment." The fragile peace shattered like glass, and Rob Stark rose to his feet, every inch the Alpha King, his eyes blazing with deadly promise. "Over my dead body." The council chamber felt like a tomb. Liana stood in the center of the circular room, surrounded by 12 high-ranking alphas, seated in ornate chairs that might as well have been thrones. Torchlight cast harsh shadows across their faces, making them look like judges presiding over an execution. Guards lined the walls, too many guards for one unarmed Omega girl. She was not here as a guest. She was here as a specimen. "Step forward," Lord Harridan commanded from his seat at the council's head. Liana's legs trembled, but she obeyed. Rob stood to the side. positioned near the king's chair but not sitting, his face carved from stone. She'd seen the struggle in his eyes when the guards had come for her, the war between the king who had to follow protocol and the alpha who wanted to tear them apart for touching what the bond claimed as his. He'd let them take her, and that hesitation, brief as it was, had told the council everything they needed to know. "Lyanna Snow," Harridan began, his voice echoing off stone walls. "You stand before the Alpha Council, under suspicion of manifesting a mate bond with His Grace, King Robb Stark. Do you deny this?" She wanted to lie, to run, to disappear back into the anonymous safety of the outer villages, where no one expected anything from her. But the bond wouldn't let her. I don't know what I'm feeling," she said honestly. "But something happened when I saw him." "Not when you saw him," Councillor Thrace corrected coldly. "When you intruded upon his private chambers, when you deliberately sought him out." "That's not what happened," Lyanna protested. "I was lost. The door was open. I didn't know." "Silence." Harridan's command cracked through the air like a whip. "You will speak only when asked direct questions. Your opinion on what happened is irrelevant. Facts are what matter here." Lyanna's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She'd spent her whole life being invisible, and now she was being told her words didn't matter, even when she was the center of attention. "The facts," Harridan continued, "are these. You are an unmated virgin omega of unknown bloodline. You were found in the king's private solar, under compromising circumstances. Within hours, His Grace, who has refused every potential match for 5 years, placed you under personal protection and threatened the council when we sought to question you properly." His eyes narrowed. "The bond has manifested. The only question is whether it will be recognized or annulled." Lyanna's breath caught. "Annulled?" "The council has the authority to break bonds deemed politically inconvenient or magically unstable," Councillor Marin explained, her voice clinical. "Especially bonds involving omegas of questionable origin, who might pose a security risk to the crown." "She poses no risk," Robb said, speaking for the first time. His voice was controlled, but Lyanna could feel the fury radiating from him through the bond. It made her skin prickle with heat. "With respect, Your Grace, you are not objective in this matter," Harridan replied. "The bond cloud's judgment makes alphas irrational. I am perfectly rational. Then prove it." Harridan leaned forward. "Submit the Omega for full verification. Let our healers examine her, test her bloodline, determine if she carries any dormant powers that might threaten the stability of the North. If she is found acceptable, the bond will be recognized, and she will become your mate under moon law. If not," he shrugged, "the bond will be severed for the good of the realm." Lyanna felt the blood drain from her face. Severing a bond was supposed to be excruciatingly painful, potentially fatal for the weaker party, usually the Omega. "And if I refuse the examination," she asked quietly. "Then you will be charged with sedition and conspiracy against the crown," Thrace said, "the penalty for which is death." The room spun. This wasn't about the bond. This was about control, about reminding everyone, including their king, that the council's power superseded even divine will. Lyanna looked at Robb, silently begging him to intervene. He opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw worked as if he were physically forcing words back down his throat. He was hesitating. And in that hesitation, Lyanna saw the truth. He was an Alpha King, but he was also bound by laws older than his crown. If he defied the council too openly, he risked civil war, rebellion, the fracturing of the entire North. She was one Omega. The North was thousands. The mathematics was simple and brutal. "Fine," Liana whispered. "I'll submit to your examination." She thought she heard Rob make a sound, something between a growl and a wounded animal's cry, but she didn't look at him again. She couldn't. That night, locked in a chamber deep in Winterfell's lower levels, Liana learned what the bond really meant. She dreamed of Rob pacing his solar, his hands tangled in his hair, rage and helplessness pouring off him in waves. She felt his fury at the council, his self-loathing for not protecting her, his terror of what they might do to her during the examination. When she woke, gasping, her chest ached as if someone had reached inside and squeezed her heart. Emotional bleed-through, she remembered from whispered conversations between mated Omegas in her village. The bond creates a connection so deep, you can feel each other's pain. She pressed her palm against the cold stone wall and felt Rob on the other side of the fortress, feeling her fear as acutely as she felt his rage. The bond wasn't just connecting them, it was consuming them. Hours later, or maybe days, she'd lost track. Liana heard voices outside her door, guards changing shift. They spoke quietly, but not quietly enough. Plans to contain her in the old tower after the examination. Contain? You mean imprison? Call it what you want. Harridan's orders. If she has old blood like they suspect, she's too dangerous to leave free. Bond or no bond. What about the king? What about him? The council will offer him a political match once this Omega is dealt with. Someone suitable. Someone controllable. Dealt with. The words echoed in Liana's mind long after the guards moved on. She'd been a fool to think this would end anyway, but badly. The council didn't care about bonds or divine will or love. They cared about power. And she was a threat to that power, simply by existing. By the time dawn light crept through the narrow window, Liana had made her decision. She would run, even if it meant severing the bond. Even if it killed her. She wouldn't let herself become another tool for powerful men to use against each other. She'd rather die free than live as a weapon. The secret passage was exactly where the kitchen girl said it would be. Liana had traded her silk sleeping gown for a servant's rough wool dress, plaited her distinctive white gold hair into a tight braid, and stolen a hooded cloak from the laundry. In the hours before dawn, when even the guards grew drowsy, she'd slipped from her locked chamber using a hairpin to work the mechanism, a skill learned from a locksmith's daughter in her village, who'd taught her, just in case you ever need to escape something worse than boredom. She'd never imagined she'd need to escape a palace. The passage was narrow, the stones damp with condensation, and smelled of earth and old secrets. According to the kitchen girl, it led from the lower levels to the outer walls, emerging near the stables where Liana could steal a horse and disappear into the night before anyone realized she was gone. Her chest ached with every step. The bond screamed at her to turn around, to go back, to find him. But she pushed forward, one hand trailing along the wall for guidance in the darkness. She'd made it perhaps 50 yards when she heard footsteps behind her. Not running. Walking, steady and deliberate. "I know you can hear me," Rob's voice echoed through the passage. "Your heartbeat is too fast. You're afraid." Liana froze, her own heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm not going to stop you," he continued, his voice growing closer. "I'm not going to command you, or drag you back, or lock you in a tower like the council wants. That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" she whispered without turning around. "Because I need to say something before you go, and you deserve to hear it without guards or councils or crowns between us." Slowly, Liana turned. In the dim light filtering through cracks in the stonework, she could barely make out his silhouette. He'd come alone, no guards, no weapons, just a king standing in a forgotten passage, with his hands empty. "How did you know I'd run?" she asked. "Because I would have done the same thing." He took a step closer, just close enough that she could see his face now. The exhaustion, the pain, the raw honesty. "I felt your terror when you overheard the guards. I felt your despair when you realized the council never intended to let you go free. And I felt the exact moment you decided death was preferable to captivity." His voice cracked. "It nearly broke me, Liana. Feeling you give up. Feeling you prepare to sever the bond even if it killed you." Tears burned in her eyes. "What else was I supposed to do? They're going to lock me away regardless of what your examination finds. Use me as leverage against you, or kill me if I prove inconvenient. I won't live like that. I can't." "I know." Rob ran a hand through his hair. A gesture she was learning meant he was struggling with something. "And that's why I'm here. To tell you that you're right to run, that I won't chase you, that I won't use the bond to compel you back, or send soldiers after you, or hunt you down like some prize to be claimed." Liana stared at him, confused. "You're giving me permission to leave?" "I'm giving you freedom." He took a shaky breath. "The bond terrifies me, Liana. Not because I don't want you. Gods, I want you so much it's like burning alive. But because I'm terrified of what it could do to you. The bond doesn't ask permission. It doesn't care about consent or choice or autonomy. It just takes. And I've seen what happens when alphas let the bond rule them. I've seen omegas become shells of themselves, their entire existence reduced to serving their mate's needs. Rob, I would rather lose you than become the cage that traps you," he said fiercely. "I would rather spend the rest of my life feeling the emptiness of a severed bond than know I destroyed the fire in you. The strength, the stubbornness." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The way you looked at the council and told them you didn't know what you were feeling, even though we both knew it was a lie. You're magnificent, Liana Snow, and I won't let anyone, including myself, take that from you." The tears spilled over now, hot against her cold cheeks. "You're an alpha king. You're supposed to claim what's yours, command, dominate, take. Maybe I'm a terrible alpha then." He spread his hands. "Because all I want is for you to have a choice. Real choice. Not one forced by divine law or council decree or bond compulsion." His grey eyes found hers in the darkness. "So here it is. You can leave. Right now. Take the passage to the stables. I'll make sure there's a horse ready, supplies, coin, and a letter granting you safe passage through the north. The council will be furious, but I'll deal with them. You'll be free. And if I stay..." The question came out barely above a whisper. "If you stay, it has to be because you want to, not because the bond demands it, not because you feel obligated or afraid or trapped, but because you looked at all your options, including freedom, and chose this, chose us." He swallowed hard. "Chose me. Not the king. Not the alpha the bond says you're meant for. Just me. The man who's terrified of losing you, and even more terrified of keeping you." Liana's mind raced. She could leave. He was offering her everything she'd thought she wanted: escape, anonymity, freedom from councils and politics, and predetermined fates. But standing in this forgotten passage, looking at a king who just offered to let her break both their hearts for the sake of her autonomy, she realized something that shook her to her core. She didn't want to run anymore, not from him. "You're an idiot," she said, her voice thick with tears and laughter, and something that felt dangerously like love. Rob blinked. "What?" "You're standing here offering me freedom, respecting my choice, seeing me as a person instead of a prize, and you think that makes you a terrible alpha." She took a step toward him, then another. "You're the only alpha who's ever asked me what I want. The only one who's ever looked at me and seen someone worth protecting instead of someone to be controlled. You think I want to run from that?" "Liana." "I choose to stay," she said firmly. "Not because the bond tells me to. Not because I'm afraid of the council, or seduced by power, or have nowhere else to go. I'm staying because you just gave me the most precious thing anyone has ever offered me, genuine choice, and I'm choosing you. The man who would rather suffer than see me caged, the king who came alone into a dark passage to set me free." The hope that blazed across his face was almost painful to witness. "Are you certain?" he asked hoarsely. "Terrified," she admitted, "but certain." For a moment they simply stood there, the bond humming between them with something that felt less like chains and more like wings. Then Rob smiled, truly smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "We're both fools, then." "Probably." They walked back through the passage together, side by side, not touching but closer than before. And for the first time since the bond had manifested, Liana felt like they were walking towards something, instead of running from it. Neither of them noticed the shadow that detached from the wall behind them, or the glint of a blade in the darkness. The Alpha Council had reconvened at dawn, and this time Rob had insisted Liana attend. "If they want to judge her, they'll do it with her standing beside me," he'd told Lord Harridan, with a tone that brooked no argument. "Not locked in a chamber like a criminal. Not treated like property to be examined and discarded. She stands with me, or there is no council session at all." Harridan had acquiesced with barely concealed fury. Now Liana stood at Rob's right hand in the circular chamber, acutely aware of 12 pairs of eyes watching her every breath. The councillors sat in their ornate chairs, faces ranging from curious to hostile. Guards lined the walls, more than usual, she noticed with growing unease. "The council has deliberated," Harridan announced, rising from his seat. "And we have come to a decision regarding the Omega and her situation." Rob's hand moved subtly closer to hers, not quite touching, but close enough that she felt the warmth of him. The bond pulsed with his tension. "Given the extraordinary circumstances," Harridan continued, "and the king's passionate defense of the girl, we have decided to allow the bond to stand, provisionally." Liana's breath caught. That sounded almost reasonable. "However," Thrace added, standing as well, "the Omega must submit to containment protocols until we can verify her bloodline poses no threat to the realm. She will be housed in secured quarters, under constant supervision, her movements restricted, her interactions monitored." "Absolutely not," Rob cut him off. "Those are prison terms." "Those are safety terms, Your Grace," Harridan countered, "for everyone's protection, including hers. If she truly carries old blood as the legends suggest, she could be a target for—" The first window exploded inward in a shower of glass and steel. Liana barely had time to scream before chaos erupted. Black-clad figures poured through the shattered opening, dropping from ropes with inhuman grace. Assassins, at least 6 of them, faces hidden behind dark masks, blades gleaming in the morning light. The guards reacted instantly, but they were positioned wrong, focused on the councillors rather than external threats. One guard fell with a throwing knife in his throat, before he could draw his sword. "Protect the king," Captain Gregor roared, but the assassins weren't moving toward Rob. They were moving toward Lyanna. Time seemed to slow. She saw one assassin break from the pack, saw the wicked curve of his blade as he raised it, saw the cold calculation in his visible eyes. He was fast, too fast. The guards would never reach her in time. But Rob was faster. He slammed into her from the side, his body becoming a shield between her and the descending blade. She felt the impact, heard his sharp intake of breath as steel bit into his shoulder instead of her heart. Blood bloomed across his tunic, dark and wet. "No." The word tore from Lyanna's throat, primal and anguished. The bond screamed. Everything inside her that had been dormant, sleeping, waiting for the right moment. It all erupted at once. Silver light exploded from Lyanna's body like a star going nova. The assassin who'd stabbed Rob was thrown backward, slamming into the stone wall with bone-crushing force. The light grew brighter, more intense, until everyone in the chamber had to shield their eyes. And then the light took shape. A wolf materialized behind Lyanna, around her, through her, massive and ethereal and impossibly beautiful. Its fur was silver white, the color of moonlight on fresh snow, and its eyes burned with the same violet silver as Lyanna's own. It was both corporeal and not, both real and legendary, a creature that should not exist, but did. The wolf of the old blood. The guardian of the ancient Omega line that everyone thought extinct. It threw back its head and howled. The sound shook the chamber. The remaining assassins froze, their weapons clattering from nerveless fingers. Even the guards staggered back, eyes wide with primal fear and awe. The silver wolf turned its massive head toward the assassins, lips pulling back from teeth that looked carved from ice and starlight. When it growled, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The assassins ran. They scrambled back through the window, abandoning their fallen comrade, some of them sobbing with terror as they fled. The wolf watched them go with ancient, knowing eyes, then slowly turned back to Lyanna. Their gazes met, woman and wolf, Omega and legend, and Lyanna felt a rush of understanding flow through her. This wasn't something foreign. This wasn't possession or curse. This was her. It had always been her. Sleeping, waiting, patient. The wolf lowered its head, pressing its ethereal muzzle against Lyanna's palm in a gesture of recognition and acceptance. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it dissolved back into silver light and faded. Lyanna collapsed. Rob caught her before she hit the ground, his wounded shoulder forgotten as he cradled her against his chest. Blood from his injury stained her dress, but his hands were gentle, his face fierce with protection and pride, and something that looked like reverence. "Don't you dare take her from me now," he snarled at the council, his voice pure alpha command. "Don't you dare." But the counselors weren't moving to seize her. They were staring, mouths open, faces pale with shock. Lord Harridan was the first to find his voice. "The old blood," he whispered. "By all the gods. It's real. She's real." "What does this mean?" Counselor Morin asked, her clinical composure shattered. The ancient texts said the old bloodline died out centuries ago, that the guardian wolves vanished when the last Omega Queen was murdered by... She stopped abruptly. "By the Alpha Council," Rob finished coldly, pieces falling into place. "Your predecessors killed them because they were too powerful to control. And now she's back. The one thing you've feared for generations." Harridan's face had gone grey. "Your Grace, you must understand." "I understand perfectly." Rob stood, lifting Liana's unconscious form with him, as if she weighed nothing. His shoulder bled freely, but he didn't seem to notice. My mate just saved this entire council from assassins who walked through your security like it was made of paper. She protected you, even after you tried to cage her. And now you're terrified because you can't control her, because she's proof that Omegas were never meant to be subjugated. He turned toward the shattered window, where snow was beginning to drift inside. Consider this council dissolved, he said quietly, by royal decree, effective immediately. Your Grace, you cannot. I am the Alpha King of the North, and I can do whatever I damn well please. His gray eyes swept across the councillors with glacial fury. Especially when my mate's life is at stake. Especially when she carries power that predates your corrupted laws. The realm will fall into chaos, Thrace protested. Then we'll build something better from the ashes. Rob looked down at Liana's pale face, tucked against his chest. Starting with a world where Omegas choose their own fate, where bonds are recognized, but not enforced, where power serves love instead of crushing it. He walked toward the door, his boots crunching on broken glass. Your Grace, Harridan called after him. What about the assassins? They'll come again, and next time, in greater numbers. Rob paused at the threshold, his smile sharp and cold. Let them come. They've just learned what happens when you threaten an Omega of the old blood. His eyes glinted with feral satisfaction. And next time, I won't hold her back. Liana woke to the sound of shouting. She was in Rob's chambers. She recognized the massive hearth, the weapons on the walls, the burgundy furs on the bed where she lay. Her body ached as if she'd run 1,000 miles, and her mind felt strange, expanded, as if something vast and ancient had stretched out inside her skull and made room for itself. The silver wolf, the power. It was real. The shouting grew louder. She could make out Rob's voice, hard with authority, and multiple others raised in anger and fear. Liana forced herself to sit up, though her limbs trembled with exhaustion. Through the partially open door, she could see into the adjoining solar, where Rob stood facing a crowd of at least 20 people. Councillors, guards, nobles, all talking over each other in barely controlled chaos. Cannot simply dissolve the council that has governed the North for 300 years. The moon law is sacred, Your Grace. You cannot discard it because of one Omega. She's dangerous. You saw what she did. That kind of power unchecked could... Enough. Rob's command cut through the noise like a blade. I have made my decision. The Alpha Council is dissolved. The moon law, as it currently stands, is abolished. We will build new governance. New laws. Ones that respect choice and consent, instead of treating Omegas like breeding stock. Lord Harridan stepped forward, his face mottled with rage. You're letting your cock do the thinking, boy. The bond has addled your brain. In a month, you'll realize what a mistake this is, but by then the damage will be irreversible. Rob moved so fast, Liana almost missed it. One moment he was standing still, the next his hand was wrapped around Harridan's throat, lifting the older man off his feet and slamming him against the wall. Call me boy again, Rob said softly, his voice more dangerous for its quietness. And I'll show you exactly what this addled alpha is capable of. Your Grace, Captain Gregor moved to intervene, but Rob raised his other hand, stopping him. She's awake, Rob said, somehow sensing Liana's consciousness through the bond, even though his back was to the door. He released Harridan, who crumpled to the floor, gasping. And this conversation is over. Those who wish to serve the North under new leadership may stay. Those who cannot accept change may leave. You have until sunset." "We're not leaving," Councillor Thrace said coldly. "And neither is the Omega." 6 guards moved toward the bedchamber door. Not Winterfell guards, Lyanna realized with growing horror, but men wearing the Council's silver wolf pin. Private security. Loyal to the Council, not the Crown. "She comes with us," Thrace continued. "For containment, for study, for the safety of the realm. You can have her back when we're certain she's not a threat." "You'll have to kill me first," Robb said flatly. "That can be arranged." Harridan had regained his feet, one hand massaging his bruised throat. "You're not the only alpha in the North, boy. There are others who would be happy to wear the crown. Others who understand that order matters more than sentiment." The air in the room changed. Thrace's hand moved to his sword hilt. Other councillors shifted, revealing weapons hidden beneath formal robes. The private guards drew their blades openly. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was a coup. "You dare," Robb breathed, his voice filled with lethal promise. "You dare draw steel in my own home, against your king. Against a king who has betrayed his duty for a piece of Omega ass," Harridan spat. "You had one responsibility: protect the North. Instead, you've brought chaos and ancient powers we don't understand into the heart of Winterfell. You've made yourself unfit to rule." Lyanna saw Robb's shoulders tense, saw him preparing for violence. The Bond screamed warnings at her. Too many enemies, Robb still injured from the earlier attack, guards positioned wrong. He could fight. He would fight. But he might not win. She wouldn't let him die for her. Lyanna stood on shaking legs and walked through the doorway into the solar. Every eye turned to her. "Stop," she said quietly. "All of you, just stop." "The Omega speaks," Thrace said mockingly. "How charming. Get back in that room, girl, before..." "Before what? Before you kill your king and kidnap me." Lyanna's voice grew stronger. "Before you repeat the same atrocities your ancestors committed against my bloodline 300 years ago? Before you prove that nothing has changed, that Omegas are still just objects to be controlled or destroyed when they become inconvenient? You don't understand the complexities of governance," Marin said, her tone condescending. "You're a village girl. You've never..." "I understand that you're terrified," Lyanna cut her off. "I understand that my existence challenges everything you've built your power on. I understand that an Omega who can defend herself, who can't be caged or controlled, destroys the lie you've been telling for generations, that Omegas need alphas to protect them, that we're weak, that we're less." She took a step forward, and several of the guards actually retreated. "But here's what you don't understand," Lyanna continued, her silver-violet eyes blazing. "I'm not your enemy. I'm not trying to overthrow anything. I'm just trying to exist without being treated like property." She looked at Harridan. "You say the Bond has addled Robb's mind. The Bond didn't make him respect me. His character did, his honor, his belief that choice matters more than tradition." "Pretty speech," Harridan sneered, "but it changes nothing. You're coming with us." The guards moved forward again. Lyanna felt the silver wolf stir inside her, felt power beginning to coil in her chest. She could stop them, could hurt them, could make them understand through fear what they refused to understand, through reason. But she didn't want to be that Omega. Didn't want her first act with her newfound power to be violence. She wanted it to be choice. "I choose him," Lyanna said clearly, her voice ringing through the chamber. She turned to look at Robb, at the man who'd offered her freedom even when it meant losing her. Not because the moon law demands it, not because the bond compels it, but because Robb Stark is the only person in this room who sees me as human, who asked what I wanted instead of telling me what I should be. She walked to him, each step deliberate, and took his hand. "I choose you," she repeated, "by my own will, my own heart, my own power." Robb's grey eyes blazed with emotion, pride, love, fierce protectiveness. "And I choose you," he said hoarsely, "not as my mate forced by divine law, but as my equal, my partner, my queen chosen by right of strength and wisdom, not bloodline or bond." The moment their hands clasped, something shifted in the air. The bond, which had been pulling at them since the moment they met, suddenly settled. It didn't disappear. Instead, it transformed, weaving around them both like silver thread, binding them together in a way that felt less like chains and more like two souls deciding to walk the same path. The council watched in horror as silver light flickered between Robb and Lyanna's joined hands. "It's sealing," Maren whispered, her face pale. "The bond is sealing by choice, not law. That's impossible." "Nothing is impossible anymore," Lyanna said softly. Harridan stared at them. His expression twisted with fury and something that looked like fear. "This isn't over," he said finally. "You've made enemies today, Your Grace. Powerful enemies. There are others who—" "Then let them come." Robb's voice was steel. "Anyone who stands against this new order, anyone who cannot accept that Omegas have the right to choose their own fate, can leave my kingdom. Now." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Thrace turned and walked toward the door. 3 other counselors followed, then 5 guards, then more. Not everyone left. Captain Gregor stayed, along with several younger guards and 2 counselors who'd always seemed less entrenched in the old ways. But more than half the room emptied, their footsteps echoing ominously as they departed. When the last one had gone, Robb finally allowed himself to sag slightly, exhaustion and pain from his shoulder wound catching up with him. "That went well," he said dryly. Despite everything, Lyanna laughed, a shaky, half-hysterical sound. "We just started a revolution." "We just started something," Robb agreed. He touched her face gently. "Are you ready for what comes next?" "No," she admitted, "but I'm ready to face it with you." Outside, snow began to fall heavily, and in the shadows beyond Winterfell's walls, those who'd left were already plotting their revenge. 3 weeks after the council's dissolution, Lyanna stood in what had once been the council chamber, and now served as the new assembly hall. The circular room had been transformed. The ornate chairs that had elevated councillors above everyone else had been removed, replaced by simple benches arranged in concentric circles, so everyone could see each other as equals. The guards no longer lined the walls like jailers. Instead, they stood outside, ensuring privacy but not intimidation. And for the first time in Northern history, Omegas sat among the Alphas and Betas, their voices given equal weight in matters of governance. "The proposal," Lyanna said, her voice steady despite the dozens of eyes watching her, "is simple. Any Omega currently bound under the old moon law will be given the choice to reaffirm or dissolve their bond. No punishment, no shame, just choice." Murmurs rippled through the assembly, some approving, others uncertain. Lord Karstark, one of the few older nobles who'd stayed after the coup attempt, raised his hand. "And if an Omega chooses to dissolve a bond, what becomes of the Alpha?" "The Alpha learns to live with the consequences of how they treated their mate," Lyanna replied evenly. "If the bond was built on respect and genuine affection, most Omegas will choose to stay. If it was built on dominance and control, she shrugged. Then perhaps the Alpha deserves to lose what they never truly valued. Rob, seated not at the head of the assembly, but among the others as he'd insisted, watched her with barely concealed pride. He'd been skeptical at first when she'd proposed addressing the assembly herself, not because he doubted her intelligence, but because he knew how terrifying public speaking could be. She'd proven him wrong spectacularly. In 3 weeks, Lyanna had gone from a nameless village Omega to a force that was reshaping the North. She'd proposed the bond choice law. She'd advocated for Omega education centers. She'd even suggested a radical idea that Omegas should be allowed to own property independently of their mates. Each proposal had been met with resistance, and each time, Lyanna had calmly, methodically dismantled the arguments against her with logic, passion, and an unwavering belief that people deserved dignity. She hadn't disappeared into being Rob's mate. She'd become herself, only more so. The vote, Captain Gregor called from his position as the new assembly moderator. All in favor of the Omega choice law. Hands rose throughout the chamber. Not all of them. Change was never unanimous, but enough. More than enough. The measure passes, Gregor announced. Lyanna released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Across the circle, Rob smiled at her, not the grim expression of a king bearing impossible weight, but genuine joy. He'd been smiling more lately, laughing even, as if dissolving the council had freed him from chains he'd worn so long, he'd forgotten they were there. After the assembly dispersed, they walked back to their chambers together. Not his chambers or hers anymore, theirs. They'd combined spaces a week ago, much to the scandal of the older nobility, who insisted propriety demanded separate quarters until a formal mating ceremony. Rob had told them exactly where they could shove their propriety. "You were magnificent today," he said, as they entered the solar, closing the heavy door behind them. Karstark looked like he'd swallowed a lemon when you pointed out that his own son's Omega had left him the moment the new laws were announced. "I probably shouldn't have used his family as an example," Lyanna admitted, collapsing onto the fur-covered couch near the fire. Her feet ached from standing so long. But he kept insisting that Omegas are happier when they don't have to make decisions. His son was a bastard who treated his mate like a servant. She's happier now. Rob sat beside her, close enough that their thighs touched. Even after weeks together, the casual intimacy still sent warmth through her. You gave her that happiness. You gave hundreds of Omegas that choice. Lyanna leaned her head against his shoulder. We gave them that choice. I couldn't have done any of this without you supporting it. Without you being willing to reshape an entire kingdom. I didn't reshape anything. You did. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. I just stopped standing in the way. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance. Outside, snow fell softly against the windows. Inside, the world felt small and safe and perfect. I thought I'd lose myself, Lyanna said quietly. When the bond first manifested, I was terrified that loving you would erase who I was, that I'd become just the Alpha King's mate, and nothing more. And now I realize I didn't disappear into love. I expanded because of it. She turned to look at him. You saw potential in me. I didn't know existed. You believed I could stand before the assembly and change minds. You never tried to make me smaller to fit into your world. You helped me grow large enough to reshape it. Rob's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. You were always this person, Liana. Strong, brilliant, fierce. I just had the privilege of watching you remember it. We're good together, she murmured. We're extraordinary together. She shifted, turning to face him fully. Promise me something. Anything. Promise that we'll keep choosing each other. Every day. Not because the bond demands it, but because we want to. Her silver-violet eyes searched his grey ones. Promise that we'll never let ourselves become what we feared. A cage for each other. Rob cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. I promise, he said solemnly. I promise to wake up every morning and choose you again. To support your dreams even when they're terrifying. To stand beside you, not above you. To love you, not because the moon decided we were mates, but because you're the most remarkable person I've ever met. I promise the same, Liana whispered. To choose you. To challenge you when you need it. To remind you that you don't have to carry the weight of the world alone anymore. She smiled. To make you laugh, even when everything feels impossible. You already do that. Good. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Not the desperate, bond-driven passion of those first chaotic days, but something deeper, more real. The kiss of two people who'd looked at forever and decided, yes, this is what we want. When they pulled apart, Rob pressed his forehead to hers, in the intimate gesture that had become theirs. The moon didn't bind us, he whispered. Liana smiled, completing the ritual they'd created. We did. Outside, the north was changing. Inside, two people who'd been told their love was predestined discovered something far more powerful. They'd chosen it anyway. Blood stained the snow crimson, but this time, Liana wasn't afraid. She stood in the courtyard of Winterfell, 3 months pregnant with the future of the north, and watched as the masked assassins circled her with their weapons drawn. 6 of them, maybe more in the shadows beyond the torchlight. They'd infiltrated during the coronation feast, waited until she'd stepped outside for air, struck when they thought she was vulnerable. They were wrong. The old blood Omega, the lead assassin hissed, his voice muffled behind black cloth. Lord Harridan sends his regards. He says to tell you that revolutions die as easily as the fools who start them. So Harridan had finally made his move. 3 months of silence after fleeing Winterfell, and now this. Hired killers in the night, targeting her when she carried Rob's child. Liana felt the silver wolf stir inside her, felt ancient power coiling in her chest, eager and ready. She'd spent 3 months learning to control it, to call it forth or push it back at will. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd stumbled into the Alpha King's chamber. She was the Queen of the North, and she was done being afraid. You should run, Liana said calmly, placing one hand over her barely visible belly. I'm giving you one chance. The assassin laughed. Pregnant Omegas are weak. Everyone knows. Silver light erupted from Liana's skin, like a star going nova. The wolf materialized in an instant, massive, ethereal, burning with violet silver fire. It was larger than before, more solid, as if her growing confidence had fed its strength. The wolf threw back its head and howled, the sound shaking snow from the battlements above. The assassins stumbled backward, terror finally replacing their arrogance. I said run, Liana repeated, her voice overlapping with the wolf's growl. Now. They ran, all but one, who was too slow. The wolf's massive paw caught him across the chest, sending him sprawling into the snow unconscious but alive. Liana had learned mercy along with power, learned that strength didn't require cruelty. Behind her, the courtyard doors burst open. Rob emerged at a dead run, sword drawn, Captain Gregor and a dozen guards at his heels. They'd felt the disturbance through the bond. Rob's panic had nearly driven him to his knees at the high table. He skidded to a stop, taking in the scene. Lyanna standing unharmed, glowing with silver light. The silver wolf slowly fading back into her skin. The unconscious assassin in the snow. The blood that wasn't hers. "You're all right," he breathed, rushing to her side. His hands moved over her face, her shoulders, her belly, checking, needing physical confirmation that she was whole and safe. "I'm fine," Lyanna assured him, catching his hands in hers. "They underestimated me. Most people still do. I never will again." He pulled her close, pressing his face into her hair. Through the bond, she felt his terror slowly draining, replaced by fierce pride and overwhelming relief. "Harridan sent them," Lyanna said quietly. "He's making his move. Then we'll end this." Rob pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "Tonight, we ride for his holdings at dawn, with every loyal house in the north. No more waiting, no more threats. Together? Always together." Captain Gregor cleared his throat diplomatically. "Your Majesties, perhaps we should return to the feast. The nobles are concerned." They heard the wolf's howl. Lyanna and Rob exchanged glances, then nodded. They walked back into the great hall hand in hand, presenting a united front. The feast had gone silent. Every noble, every Omega, every Beta and Alpha in attendance, stared as the Queen of the North returned, still glowing faintly with residual power. Word would spread by morning. The Omega Queen had defended herself and her unborn child with the power of the old blood. Had shown mercy to her attackers, even in the moment of their defeat. It was exactly the message Lyanna wanted to send. 6 months later. The Great Hall of Winterfell had never held so many people. Every house in the north had sent representatives. Every Omega who'd reclaimed their freedom under the new laws. Every Beta and Alpha who'd chosen to support the revolution rather than cling to the old ways. Even some southern nobles had traveled north, curious about the kingdom that had dared to rewrite centuries of tradition. They'd come for a coronation. Lyanna stood at the center of it all, dressed in silver and white, her pale hair braided with winter roses. Her belly was round now, unmistakable, 7 months pregnant and glowing with health. Beside her, Rob wore his crown and his finest clothes, but his attention was solely on her. "The North has always been ruled by strength," Captain Gregor announced, his voice carrying through the hall, "by blood and steel and the harsh truth of survival. But today, we recognize a new kind of strength. The strength to change, to choose compassion over cruelty, to grant freedom rather than demand submission." He turned to Lyanna, holding a second crown. Delicate silver worked to look like frost and moonlight, set with stones the color of her eyes. "Lyanna of House Snow, now and forever, Stark," Gregor continued. "The people of the North have asked that you be recognized, not just as the Alpha King's mate, but as queen in your own right. Earned through wisdom, courage, and unwavering dedication to justice. Do you accept this responsibility?" Lyanna's eyes swept across the crowd. She saw Omegas standing tall, no longer cowering. Saw Alphas who'd learned that true strength didn't require dominance. Saw a kingdom transforming itself because they dared to believe change was possible. "I accept," she said clearly, "and I promise to serve the North with every breath, to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, to ensure that no one, Omega, Beta, or Alpha, is ever again reduced to property or treated as less than human. Gregor placed the crown on her head. The hall erupted in cheers. Rob took her hand, bringing it to his lips. Through the bond, she felt his joy, his pride, his absolute certainty that this was exactly how it was meant to be. "My queen," he murmured. "My king," she replied. They turned to face their people together, partners, equals, bound by choice rather than divine decree. That night, alone in their chambers with the celebration still echoing faintly from below, Rob pressed his forehead to Liana's as he'd done 100 times before. "The moon didn't bind us," he whispered. Liana smiled, one hand resting on her belly where their child kicked vigorously. "We did. And I'd choose you again, 1,000 times, forever." "Forever," she agreed. Outside their window, snow fell softly over Winterfell. The North was at peace for now. Harridan and his supporters had been defeated, their attempted rebellion crushed not through violence but through the simple, radical act of offering mercy and rehabilitation to any who'd renounced the old ways. Most had taken the offer. Some had fled to the south, carrying tales of the Omega Queen, who commanded ancient power, and the Alpha King who'd chosen love over law. Let them talk. Let them fear or marvel or judge. Liana had learned that she couldn't control what others thought. She could only control who she chose to be. And she chose to be this: strong, compassionate, unafraid, and deeply, irrevocably in love with the man who'd given her the greatest gift of all: freedom. The child inside her kicked again, stronger this time. A future heir. A symbol of the new North. A baby who would grow up in a world where bonds were chosen, not forced. Where power served love instead of crushing it. "Do you think they'll understand?" Liana asked softly. "Our child. Future generations. What we tried to do here." Rob's hand covered hers on her belly. "I think they'll build on it. Make it even better. That's what each generation does. Takes what came before and improves it." "I hope so. I know so." He kissed her temple. "Because they'll have you as an example. The Omega who refused to be caged, who changed an entire kingdom with nothing but courage and conviction." Liana laughed softly. "I had help. You had an alpha smart enough to get out of your way." They settled into bed together, tangled in furs and each other, the bond humming contentedly between them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were always challenges. Whispers of strange movements beyond the wall, rumors of other kingdoms watching the North's transformation with interest or alarm. But tonight, they had this: each other, their child, their kingdom, their choice. And that was more than enough. The end. If you loved Liana and Rob's journey from forced fate to chosen love, let me know in the comments if you'd like to see part 2. Don't forget to subscribe for more moonlit romance, where destiny and choice collide.